don't want to
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Dottie. Feel free to interrupt us with jokes to keep us moving. I'm going to call the Wednesday, October 11th meeting of the Essex Junction City Council to order. Are there any agenda additions or changes?
We will have one additional executive session to discuss potential litigation.
Okay, so we'll make that 5G. Anything else? Amber's there. Hey, Amber. All right. Not further discussion. All those in favor of, or do we have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you.
Seconded.
Thank you. Now, without further discussion, do I have a motion to approve the amended agenda? I did that. Wow.
I'll second it again.
We're going to start over.
If you do it again,
It was the
you can say which one
jokes.
was the largest.
It was the jokes. Yeah, it was the jokes. All those in favor of approving the agenda, amended agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All those, it was unanimous. All right. Moving on, public to be heard. This is a portion of the meeting where members of the public can bring comments or concerns on items that are not on the agenda for this evening. There is a person in the room, so I'm just going to start here with Dottie. If you could just give us your name, come up to the table, full name for the person
Okay.
who writes our minutes.
Shall I begin? Okay. Last spring, I was here talking about the senior center and the changeover. And it is now less than 3 months before the changeover. And I know that Regina and Brad are going to be at the senior center, not next week, but the week after, at least one day to talk about some stuff. But I have been doing some research for myself, and I wanted to make sure that you know what the situation is about the senior van for people in the city. Because we were told that SSTA would take over. Well, I called SSTA, and they told me I had to talk to Green Mountain Transit, excuse me. Green Mountain Transit sent me the application. There's a description of what you do. There are 2 forms to fill out, one to be filled out by your physician. You have to be a diagnosed disabled person. So, well, that takes care of me right there. I am not a diagnosed disabled person. Then also, in their description of the service, it says that pickups and drop-offs at any location more than 3/4 of a mile from fixed routes will not happen. Now, I called to find out what that meant. Well, if I was eligible, now I live on Taft Street, 1 block from Route 15. If I was eligible and I wanted to use SSTA to go somewhere, the lady told me I had to walk to the train station first, and then they would pick me up at the train station, because you can't be more than 3/4 of a mile away from a bus stop, not the bus route. Now, I don't know whether the people I know at the senior center, who I believe live in the city, are officially disabled and can officially qualify to be able to use SSTA. And I don't know whether they live less than 3/4 of a mile away from a bus stop. Now, there may be other rules that I didn't hear about with my research, but this is not a substitute for the Essex senior van. When my husband and I moved back to the Junction 11 years ago, 12 years ago, shortly after that, we signed up for the senior van. Nobody asked our doctor whether we could walk. Nobody asked, there was no eligibility criteria. We signed up. We haven't used it much. it's a nice thing to know you can call on if you can plan ahead enough. But there are people that I meet at the senior center who depend on it to get them to the senior center, among other things. So, if you want me to leave you this paperwork so that you can read through it, it's not going to do me any good because I'm not eligible. But then I don't need it that badly. But there are people who need it that badly.
Okay, thank you.
You want me to clarify?
Sure.
Okay, so just to clarify the last point, Dottie, so the ADA paratransit service only serves folks within 3/4 of a mile of fixed route service. So when you look at the city of Essex Junction, that is not in 100% covered, but fairly well covers the majority of the city. It is true to qualify for that service. You need to have a disability that prevents you from being able to walk to the fixed route service or stand for the appropriate amount of time in order to be able to be picked up by the bus. So it is absolutely true. And the process of going through that in order to be able to qualify for the ADA paratransit service is more complicated than applying for the senior van service. So just to clarify how this works, if in Dottie's example, you were qualified for the ADA paratransit, SSTA would pick you up at your house. The concept being that if you are able to walk to the fixed route service, we have one of the most frequently running fixed route services in the county, and the thought process is that that's how those two federal programs, funded programs, basically work in conjunction with each other. You have a fixed route service available to you. If you are not able to access that service, the paratransit service is there. So just to...
Yeah, I guess I have a question on the, and we're not going to go too far down this road right now, but I'd be interested to find out, because my impression was that the interaction, the form from a physician or provider was akin to the form to provide a parking placard, not an official federal government designation of being disabled, which is a vast difference. One is a doctor's appointment and a conversation. The other almost always requires an attorney. So
yeah, and I'm not familiar with the placard process, right. so I don't know that. I will, Dottie can show you that application it's more complicated than one wants it to be.
Sure.
It's 12 or 15 pages or something. It's not simple.
No.
By any stretch, but it does require doctor signing off on it.
They've also liberalized it a little bit because of COVID. You now do not have to have an in-person interview, which is required in the paperwork that I have. But of course, they sent me 2 weeks ago paperwork that is now already too old to count on. But that doesn't explain why the woman I was talking to this morning said that even if I was eligible, I would have to meet the SSTA at the train station.
we can look into
She
that.
was measuring from bus stops. And she worked for SSTA.
I guess I'm not seeing the distinction between a bus stop and a fixed route, because the bus stop will be on the fixed route and they're one and the same. So, Andrew?
When we had this conversation a year or two ago, when we were originally planning this, and the conversation with Green Mountain Transit was that anywhere, like if you look in the telephone poles and you see where it says bus stop printed on that counts as a fixed route stop. So if you live within 3/4 of a mile of that then you would be eligible, as long as the eligibility of your doctor signing off on it was there. And so that's where the understanding from Green Mountain Transit leadership about how the overwhelming majority of Essex Junction does qualify geographically for it, how that came about. And so it seems as if the feedback to Green Mountain Transit's customer service, I'm assuming you spoke to, needs to be to make sure that they understand that, because it doesn't seem that that messaging has been received at that level.
Got it.
Oh, excuse me, but one other thing I forgot to mention is when I asked them how long the approval process is going to take, it would be 3 to 4 weeks. So the people that I know at the senior center have to get this started if they're expecting to be able to use the service in January. And that's 3 to 4 weeks, 3 weeks after they've gotten all the paperwork into the office. So you have to get your doctor's appointment in. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, anyone online? Anybody else in the room have anything? Is there anyone online that has a comment or concern you'd like to talk about? Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Sure, if you want to have a seat and just give us your name.
Yeah.
Quick, thank you.
Joe Carnaccio.
Okay.
Bring up a little bit of a subject that's been brought up a lot before. And that's the, our train station and bus depot. People have said that if you want something done, Facebook's not the place to do it. And, here I am, even though there's been more before me on that sore subject of a paint job. Back in June or July, I posted some pictures of it, hoping to get some responses from city council, and I didn't. I got a lot of people saying, you know, just level it, forget about the paint job, and blah, blah. It's gone on for so long, just very, very disappointed, you know, that we can't seem to get through the red tape. I know we don't own the building, and actually, when the crosswalk came up by the fairgrounds and Max Market, I asked if the paint job would come before the crosswalk, and I came to thank you in person, because I didn't expect a reply from you, Raj, but you replied, and you said, the difference is we can do the crosswalk, but we don't own the building. And I get it, but that's still kind of red tape pushing it down the road. So there's a few things, you know, next construction season. Well, is there a way we can get a date? Okay, that's one. Another thing is, and this is just a Band-Aid, but is there a way that, say, like our Village, Our Voices volunteers, which did wonders. You know, there was over 30 of us, maybe over 40 of us. We got a record-breaking 88% of the village voters to come out, right? I think I can get that many people to pitch in someday with their labor, and possibly some painters that live in the village or the city, maybe even with power sprayers. And like I said, even though it's a Band-Aid, just to get it done, because it looks disgraceful. And it's not going away. If we're waiting for next construction season, that's at least another 6 months. So I don't know if we can get permission to do it ourselves.
It's, you know, it's interesting. I did walk around it Monday or Friday, I can't remember which, taking some pictures. And on this side of it, there's a big broken window. And I'll admit, some of this is throttling how much input we're giving to staff right now, understanding more intimately what's on the plate and what's underway. So this is a little bit inside baseball, but knowing that there's a grant and a process underway, and those talks have finally started to get the work done that's going to encase that building. And also, you know, what we bring up for the folks we have to deal with when. But I did hear a lot of that feedback and made a trip over there myself to kind of see what was up. And I do have a number of pictures and some notes that I wanted to drop off with staff, but I guess I'm saying I'm planning on doing that, but I am throttling how much I'm dropping at 2 Lincoln for folks to deal with, understanding that the list of pressing items right now, that is one of them, but it's just a matter of trying to manage priorities in terms of how many people we have to do it. And your plan is a great one. It's something I've thought of a number of times. It's understanding that, you know, it's the railroad folks in St. Albans, Genesee and Wyoming nationally, Amtrak separately, which we just met with last week, and coordinating all of those people to just get permission or find out who to speak to maybe get permission to be on the property to do something like that. And honestly, for all of Amtrak's talking up the work they've done on the ramp and everything, there's still a really ugly shed next to the building falling apart. There's a broken window. They're not taking care of trash on a daily. And GMT needs a phone call to find out why their bus stop needs a coat of paint and who's responsible for that. And I don't think that's very clear right now to me. So I apologize that it's taken this long to get to. I'm not trying to make an excuse for it, but the reason I haven't been pushing it as hard is just because I'm trying to manage when we give staff these requests to do, because I understand, I'm starting to understand, excuse me, how much staff time it takes.
What do you mean by staff?
Having people be able to handle that work and make those phone calls and coordinate and again, I'm saying with the railroad, there are many different players in that. We don't own the property. And as it is, we have staff managing a grant and a construction envelope to modify that building. And a match, I believe, right? We're matching it from our taxpayers for a building we don't own. We don't own that building. And yet our taxpayers are going to pay to beautify it. So I'm trying to also, in my head, I guess, part of my subconscious is saying, I don't want to do that twice if we're doing it next summer or spring. So I'm not trying to make excuses. I see it every day too, and it bothers the heck out of me.
Well, that's what's kind of scary, is that we don't have a date.
We don't have a date, do we, Regina? I mean, we've just started managing the grant and doing the paperwork with the railroad and trying to get the process underway for contractors. But we have been managing 4 different construction projects this construction season, and that one hasn't been one of them.
Yeah, I do not have a date yet. It is highly unlikely that the construction season is not next year.
You mean it's going to happen next year, or
It's
it may not?
highly unlikely that it will happen next year.
Oh, okay.
Wow. Okay. Well,
I misspoke then.
I cannot see any owner or owners of that building denying permission for a group of volunteers to have it painted. How do we get permission so someone doesn't?
I'm just going to leave it tonight. We're going to look into it seriously.
I mean, would you like a petition?
No, I think we've heard it. And I think getting an update, which we are, I believe, going to get on this project sometime in the next 2 or 3 meetings. We'll also ask that if it is going to be a construction season away, so in 25, that we find out from the railroad what can be done. But again, I am personally I'm going to want them to have something in it. Because honestly, it's their responsibility to keep it up in the first place.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm a little disturbed that we even have to be talking about it right now. And so are you, I get it. But I think it's something I brought up with the folks when they were visiting from Amtrak, but it's not even them. Because they're in the same boat we are. It's not their building.
no.
So I hear you. We'll try to get an answer out in the next couple weeks.
That would, public communication would be something, because there's a lot of people that are really, 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 really.
Yeah, it's right in the middle of the town.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it's gone on for so long.
And we did ask a building owner on Railroad to fix their broken glass window, and I had no idea until Monday that the one facing the parking this direction on the train station was also in the same condition. So
Yeah.
we'll be reaching out to.
Yeah, because I believe, and I don't think we want to go down this route, but don't we have ordinances, even though we don't own the building, don't we have ordinances on the upkeep of buildings? I mean, nobody wants to go down that route, you know, and I don't think we have anybody to enforce it anyways, but
Getting there.
if you think that we need to get a group of volunteers together, I
I mean,
will
if that's the
certainly
way
help.
if that's the way we go, I'll be first in line.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and
And, you know, also,
I tell you what, we'll update you in a couple weeks. I don't know that it'll be any sooner. I don't know that anybody is going to be able to get in touch with them that quickly.
Okay.
So,
Well,
but if we can't, we'll update it in a couple weeks, even if we can't.
yeah,
And I'll make sure I at least reach out to you or mention it in a meeting
yeah,
that this is what we know so far.
yeah,
But yeah, I get it. It's very frustrating.
yeah.
And
And just for the record, you know, I've lived here, I don't know, between 35 and 40 years. I've never used that station. You know, it's not like I use it. I don't use it. I'm just sick of looking at it. I mean,
well, I will say, put in a plug for it. It's very convenient. Some friends just went down to Brattleboro for $18 and had them.
oh yeah,
about the
I'm
same amount of
sure.
time as
And
driving.
apparently
Had a great time.
I'm
So,
hearing stops are going to be added in Canada and
Yeah.
you know,
so
all
please
right.
use it. Thank you,
that's
Joe.
it. Yeah, some communication to our community about the progress or non-progress, just so we know where we're at, and if there's anything we can do as you know, living in the community, just let us know.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Is there anyone else in the room? I don't see any hands up on Zoom. Yes, sir.
Yes,
You want to come up? Sorry, we can't. The folks on channel 17 can't hear you from back there. So you could just give us your name too. That'd be great.
James Grimsley. I live here. Just a suggestion. There are many ways to build a building. This Amtrak station could be the first self-heating and cooling antiseptic hempcrete building. I'm building with hempcrete in my own house, just a couple blocks from here, and I'm getting it from Chewy.com. It's an antiseptic animal bedding. You combine with lime, you stripe ball fields with, and water. And we don't need to paint anymore. It all goes in the watershed. We can be ethical. We can use casein from the dairy industry, and we can make milk paint. It's very simple. These are renders that our tradesmen can learn to do, and our ancestors did. I know now. Come by my house. I'll show you hempcrete. It's a suggestion to Amtrak, and I understand it's like the post office. They're renting from a landowner. My question here is, can you disclose the landowner? Who's the landowner? Who owns the train station?
Genesee
The
and Wyoming.
railroad whose actual name I can never
I
remember.
think it's Genesee and Wyoming, but is it?
So Genesee is actually the landowner.
Genesee and Wyoming, I think, is the at minimum building owner.
So,
And the England Central Railroad, I think, is a subsidiary of that.
so bring going concern in town. It's an accounting term that means you care. Buy the property if you can. Build a hempcrete station. It's a very small dwelling. It'll be 65 degrees in year round. It'll be the healthiest place indoors to breathe in this town. My house is slowly becoming that. My name is James, with love.
Thank you, James. Is anyone else in the room? I don't see any hands online. Just a couple seconds. And I guess we'll move on to 5A, interview for Brownell Library trustees. And pulling up sorry. Just going to go with the order in which they are in the packet. So Karen, would you like to come up? Am I saying Hersheimer?
Hergesheimer?
Pretty close. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you're applying for the Brownell Library trustee position, and this is coming up now and not being elected, if I understand this right, because there was an opening.
Yes.
Normally, this would be an elected position.
Yes.
One thing I didn't see in here, and I did have a question on, was how long is the remaining term? Do we know? We can find out later.
I believe it's still 2027, but I'm
27,
not.
okay. Well, sorry to interrupt with that little detail. Would you like to tell us a little bit about why you're interested in becoming a library trustee?
Sure. Somebody asked me to apply, that there was an opening, and I've done other volunteer positions within the community, mostly the kids' schools that my children are in, and I didn't really have time. And I've always loved the library. As I've said in my application, it's my city center personally. It's where a lot of my heart is for the city. And so when somebody came up and said, you should apply, I said, okay, it's time. So I'm here tonight to apply.
Great, well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any of the counselors have any questions for Karen?
I would like to ask what your favorite program is that the library puts on, or is there a program that you believe needs more support?
I'm partial to Must Read Mondays because I'm the volunteer liaison for that. And I've read so many books with that group that I never would have picked up myself. So I think that's my favorite program. But the programs that my children have been part of and have had access to, I think, have been wonderful. I wish more members of the community could take part or would take part in them. And I think there is an underserved population that is worth exploring. If I were to be part of that group, that I'd just be interested to hear. I don't know the inner workings of the library and how they pick the programs. So I would just be curious to be part of that group and just make sure that the net is cast as wide as possible to make it accessible to as many people as we could.
Thank you.
Can I ask can you describe who we're not reaching? You said
I think a lot of new Americans, people who have a language barrier. There are, for my volunteer time in the schools, there are kids that don't know how, they take them to the library to get a library card at the end of every year, but they don't have families that continue that practice. And so I think there's people that either can't get to the library or they don't know, or they just are nervous about going and what is it and where is it and why is it there? People who have come from countries that don't have a library system like we do in the United States. So I think there's people in the community that would really, enjoy it if they had some help getting there.
Great. Andrew, nothing. Amber? No? I guess my question would be, you've been involved with the library a long time, obviously, right? So you're familiar sort of with the trajectory it's taken over the last 10 or 15 years. Where do you see the next 10 for it? 5 or 10? Like, what's next for Brownell? I mean, they've made a lot of changes over the last few years, significant changes into how they work, really facilitating, I think, not having to go into the library. So what do you see as the next 5 or 10 years for that, as you see sort of the previous 10 or 15 and then the recent changes they've made?
I think it's hard to answer that completely without knowing, again, the inner workings of the library, but I think there's a technology component that they're starting to be on the wave of. I think there's more work that could be done with making the library more accessible. I think sort of rethinking a brick and mortar library in the next 10 years is sort of, where the, younger generations now that don't feel like they need to walk into a library to access information. But I also see the library as a gathering place, as a community space. And so I think for me, having people not see the library as, oh, I go and I get books, to see it as that community gathering space and a safe space and an inclusive space, and more than just the books. It's the people that work there, it's the people that meet there, it's the programs they provide. So I think just expanding on what a library means to somebody, I'd be interested in exploring that.
I think you've answered my questions. I don't hear any others from any of the counselors, so I really appreciate you stepping forward for this and taking the time to come tonight.
Yeah.
We are not going to make a decision tonight. We still have one more person that couldn't be here, so it'll be at least the 25th, I think, before you hear from us. Sorry about the delay.
It's okay.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
And Mara's not here. Mike Sullivan, would you like to come up?
Hello, guys.
So would you like to explain what motivated you to aim forward for this position?
After her,
Yeah, it's not fun having to do this one after the other.
yeah, I'm not sure.
It's okay to say that.
Because listening to your questions, I realized maybe I don't have some of the focus that other people might have. So I'm probably going to undermine my thing. But the reason I applied,
Everybody brings something valuable, Mike.
I am much concerned about banning books. Very concerned about the attitude that seems to be all too prevalent, and thankfully not so much, I think, here, but and sometimes I think I should move to make a difference and vote somewhere else, like Florida. But
Back to library.
but yeah, I think the Brownell is a premier library, and we'd really like to see it continue as a premier library. The programs, again, I'm not deep into the programs, though I have been tempted to join the, what is it, on Tuesdays mornings, the 10 to 11:30 current events discussion.
Yep.
But yeah, so I still keep my hat there, but I think you may find other people that you may qualify better now that I'm thinking about it a little longer. Make your lives a little easier. I will also say one other thing, since the railroad stuff came up: quiet crossings.
Yeah, different meeting, but yes, we agree. Well, hold on, don't go. Unless you're pulling. I mean,
Wow.
you showed up, so we're gonna ask.
Okay, do it.
Amber, anything?
You mean the guy at 5 a.m.?
5 a.m., 2 a.m.
All right, different meeting. Rein it in. Marcus, any questions? Andrew?
Come on, Marcus.
Oh, Mike. No, let me ask you about, again, where you think the library needs more support. You mentioned already a program, so but I am curious about where you think the library could use.
As was identified prior, that I don't know the depths of that without the internal stuff. I think focusing on clear and open communication, the library is for everybody. Buckle in the idea of transportation. I guess the senior bus would also bring you to the library, obviously, but that would seem like a thing that would be important to have, that elderly or people without transportation could get there. Parking, maybe, I don't know. It always seems like, then again, I hardly ever go over to the bigger parking lot, so.
So you're saying a bookmobile / senior bus all in one?
Yes.
Mobile grocery store and clinic. Also dentist.
Just throwing that out there.
I heard tonight Dollar General
Big
is,
bus.
I heard tonight Dollar General is starting mobile clinic.
Would love that. I'll ask you the same question. Where do you see the library going in the next 5 or 10 years?
Obviously, it's probably landlocked as far as footprint is concerned. So probably it not growing so much, but bringing in more technology to be able to service not only e-type reader type stuff, but also bringing in watching when I see the announcement that there is somebody comes in and does technical support or help for people who just, how do I do this on this? Yeah, I think that would be a very good thing to maybe beef up a bit. So yeah, yeah.
Well, great. Nobody else? Nope, we're good. Well, thank you. I think you heard before, we're not going to make a decision. tonight.
Understand.
It'll be
Yep.
after the
Yep.
25th, but very much appreciate you coming out.
I'm still enjoying playing on the Chittenden Solid Waste District board.
Oh,
That's
good.
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have to have you back on that.
Rajan, just to answer your question about the term, the motions were made specifically for each of these
Okay.
positions, and it says until the next annual election. So I will confirm this, but I think this position is until April when a trustee can be put up on the ballot.
Okay, so the person that gets this position would have to be on the ballot, be on the ballot
If they wanted to stay on.
if they wanted to stay on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily finish, because if there's, say, 2 years left, it wouldn't necessarily fill that term, whatever that, so there would be trustees as normal, but there would be this position that would fill out the remainder of a term potentially.
Well,
It would not fill
Because
out
it's a
the
three,
remainder.
because it's a 3-year term.
right,
Right.
looks like this.
So
yeah.
you would have the trustees with their 3-year terms, and then there would be potentially this position also on the ballot that would be, say, because again, I don't know what the remainder is. Let's just say it's for a 1-year term.
Right. It's what happened to
Yeah.
Amber.
Yeah.
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 And then they do it again. They'd have to run again to get on cycle.
Got it.
Okay.
So I can confirm
that-
that because we'll have to do this next time, but I think
Yeah.
that's.
Okay. Okay.
So then also within this same agenda item, you have the Chittenden County Communications Union District position. That is also Marta, and she was not able to come tonight, but she has confirmed that she can come on the 25th.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
we can have both discussions again on the 25th.
Great. All right. So no action. Thank you both for coming again. And, please feel free to stick around. No? Okay. We are moving on to 5B, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission presentation with Mr. Charlie Baker.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for the time on your agenda. Good to see you all. This is kind of my annual customer service check-in. We are a member service organization and serve our member municipalities. Provided a report that I'm confident is in your packet because I verified it earlier. You probably read it, but I'll just kind of do a little walkthrough and kind of pause after each section to see if there's anything you'd like to discuss. Any feedback on our services or issues that are in front of the city that should be on my mind as we figure out how to help you best. The first page of the report, first section, kind of gives a background, history, and membership of the Regional Planning Commission, a little bit on our overall budget and how we leverage municipal dues. Oh, thank you, Regina, to bring in state and federal funds into the county. And then who your representatives are on our board or were on our board and committees last fiscal year. So I know I'm aware Elaine and Dan switched seats. which is great. And thank you. They really have both been active and great participants on our board, as have your staff on our committees. And then flipping onto the second section, it reviews kind of specific things we did for you last fiscal year. A big project on your stormwater inspection. Someone helped with updating your land development code at the beginning of the fiscal year before she found something else to do. Then, sorry for,
He's still sore.
I know, still a little sore. Still a little sore. Sorry, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Regina worked at the Regional Planning Commission before taking this job as your city manager, and we're thankful that she's in that role.
Sore away.
Also, GIS services, and just a variety of technical assistance activities and data, and a little bit on byways and the E&D services. So we host a quarterly meeting on the elderly and disabled services with the providers in the county. If you're ever interested in what's going on there, which maybe. So that's, yeah, I'll take any feedback on, I'll pause there, take any feedback on any of those things we did for you last year.
I've heard only good things. Very much appreciate it. I think there's talk about potentially working with your group on identifying rental housing stock in the city as we consider a rental registry, maybe under the GIS category. And
I heard about that as well. Yeah, so let me flip the page because we'll
Okay.
kind of talk
Get
about
ahead.
future work. Yep.
right.
Let me ask, if I may.
Yes,
one
sir.
question. This might actually be for Regina, just so that I understand. So in the case of, and I'm looking at the GIS, for instance, and, we're talking about bike and pedestrian. Are our committees interacting with the CCRP or how does that, I guess, relationship work?
Yeah.
Because obviously it looks like there's work here that they could either benefit from or, again, working through staff.
Yeah.
Trying to, again, utilize this information.
Yeah, so for the most part, CCRPC runs an annual solicitation process, and we look at what needs that we have, and we prioritize that list, and we get it over to CCRPC in January. There are also minor level projects that we can ask for along the way, and typically, unless this has changed, that some of it comes at a fee for service if it's over 12-hour increments. So that should be run through staff and the staff that are running those committees so that we can make sure CCRPC isn't overwhelmed by tasks and they're coming from the, requests are actually coming from the city. And that we can make sure we have the budget to pay for it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it is a pretty deliberative, yeah, thanks Regina for that, deliberative process of like, we'll send out a solicitation around Thanksgiving time, ask municipalities to let us know what we could help them with the following fiscal year. We have a committee that reviews all those and kind of make sure that we can fit it into our budget and yes, hours of staffing. Our board votes on that in May, and then hopefully, we start it sometime July or thereafter in the fiscal year, depending on what you need. And it's always, the city is always in charge of what we're doing, and I think our staff is always pretty sensitive of like, we're not kind of egging one of your committees on to do things that you haven't talked about and provided direction on. So and the way I think about it is that we're kind of supplemental staff for you. Let us know what we can help with. We are here to supplement you and help get done what you need to get done when you can't do it. So
Thank you.
I guess I am curious about, I'm just kind of scanning through this and I remembered I made a note in a different piece of paper that I didn't bring tonight, but the project that was talked about years ago, now it feels like years ago.
Which
between
one?
West Street Extension and Susie Wilson Road intersection. It's sort of listed here under technical assistance, but I'm just going to make a plug that some of us are really hoping that kind of catches again. That was approved those were discussions that I believe were had with CCRPC. A plan was developed. Our board approved it. I think the town approved it. And I believe it got set aside around conversations around the Susie Wilson Road intersection redesign.
Is this a bike path
It
facility
is a
or?
redesign of that whole section, road, removing the median, changing the format of the road a bit to multi-use path, bike path, road, turn lane road, bike path, I think.
Yeah, that,
It's on here because there's been a lot of Chris Ewan here has been trying to really get up to speed on what the history of that was and what's the status of it. So he's been talking to Brian quite a bit about trying to figure that all out.
I mean, the beginning of that, most of that work with CCRP was amazing. The process was great. The input they provided and the facilitation was great. Just hoping to see it resurrected.
yeah, and that also involves the town? If I
Insofar, my understanding is
recollect.
insofar as it impacts that intersection,
Yeah, okay.
which, it's a good time. V-Trans, Town of Essex, us. More discussions. Money.
Yeah, thanks for that heads up. I'll kind of go back and, that was Brian in my office that was talking, okay.
Yeah, so they are, between Chris and Brian, they are trying to figure out what the next steps are and where to kind of bring that back to life a little bit.
Yep.
There is a separate, V-Trans is working on a separate Susie Wilson Road project right now that has somewhat involved.
Okay, maybe that's
really
right.
wouldn't address what we're talking about, which is basically road diet.
Gotcha.
That's the term I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Such a funny term. Anyway.
Yeah, well. Going on to the next section on top of page 3, you've got the little project Crescent Connector, hopefully finishing up next year. I heard with interest, sorry, tangent, the conversation on the train station, that will probably appear in our program. Also, when that gets programmed and scheduled, there'll be some communication between the city and V-Trans and us, and to make sure it's in the program. And then in terms of our actual work program for this fiscal year, the 3 things that you see in the box here, this table, are things that we're working on this fiscal year, including the GIS service. We'll be in touch soon on this transit-oriented development. We got that special grant. And just to kind of make sure we're on the same page with the municipality, we finally got approval from FTA to move forward. So we finally got an agreement there. And we'll start working on the scope and consultant selection and things like that for that work. Probably realistically, sorry, this is for Regina, probably January startup, but we're thinking. And then more work on your stormwater inspections. And I'll pause it. I guess I'll just jump into the last section. Is a whole variety of things that are we call regional activities. Are kind of done without regard to any specific municipality. A wide range of things. A few of them I'll just kind of call out and mention. One is we are in the process of updating our regional plan. We're actually going to extend the schedule for that. And in the second related bullet, spend a little bit more time on engagement, particularly with underrepresented communities in the county, and also deal with some other issues that are likely to come up either through the legislature or for other reasons where we kind of need to take some more time on our regional plan. But we are spending a lot more time on equity and engagement, and trying to get better at doing that, which is probably going to be a career-long effort, but we will kind of keep marching down that path. Thought?
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Or question?
Well, I mean, it's on the equity work.
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of curious. Do you foresee that using that lens and incorporating that lens in decision making and project review, and really being intentional about
that is exactly
that work when you do something like the TOD grant with us and we start looking? I mean, there are places to start incorporating that. Is that kind of the work, or is it more about, is it a little more, I don't even know what it would be. So I'm curious if that's sort of the thinking behind it. I mean, I guess I'm saying I hope so.
Yeah. I think we've kind of got it divided up into like kind of 4 things. One of them is definitely what you talked about, like prioritizing our work with a little bit of that lens, particularly if resources start to get tighter. let's make sure we're doing that. There's also an aspect of just relationship building, with the variety of communities that we have. So that's an important part. And so, yeah, I think we're trying to be thoughtful. We're not going too fast. We're trying to, kind of move at the speed of trust, as they say.
Right.
And be thoughtful about how we're doing things internally and externally, to really, address those issues in our community that, frankly, to me, seem foundational for our future. We're getting more diverse. We need to be more inclusive as we move forward. So,
Yeah, and I guess I was saying, right, making sure those people are at the table,
yep,
that every decision sort of includes questions like, how will this impact
yep,
this community? How will this, have they been asked?
that's exactly.
Participating in the process, that kind of thing.
Yep,
Okay.
that's exactly. It's not going as quickly as I would like, but
Yeah.
but we have a fairly active equity advisory committee that's helping with that. But also, when we do an individual project, like one that's really tied into this is the Winooski Bridge, right? So we're spending a lot more time with the community. I mean, we did when we were doing the scoping for it to get the concept, and now that it's in V-Trans with design, we're working with them to do even more engagement on kind of the final design for it. But that's just one really big project that where it's real relevant. But we're even trying to think more systematically, and frankly, that's why we're taking more time with the plan, like even embedding equity in more detail throughout our plan document, and involving the community in that. So it's taking more time. Other things, just real quickly, a lot of focus on housing. We'll have a Building Homes Together press conference, I think, in about 2 weeks. Heads up for that, we're not meeting our targets. Shocking. And I say, sorry for those who don't appreciate my humor. I say shocking only because we're just in a place in time where costs have gone up dramatically and interest rates have made construction a little harder right now. So we'll keep working on that. There's a lot of conversation, obviously, in the legislature from S100 this year. There'll be much more conversation this coming year around state permitting and removing regulatory barriers in the state for housing. Happy to talk more about that. Also, just other issues, energy, biking, walking, clean water, emergency management. Happy to take any feedback or questions, or if there's things on your minds that I should. And also, lastly, I guess I'll end with, we do a legislative breakfast every early December. If you have, issues that you'd like to make sure are kind of on that agenda, please let me know.
I'm pretty certain we will.
Okay.
We'll be letting you know. I guess the only other, Amber, I can't see you on the screen right now, but I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add or ask right now.
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. Andrew?
I just have a question around like the building homes together, but broadly about how there is such a lack of housing within our community, in particular within our county. Does CCRPC have or foresee a role in broader community engagement and about how each community in our county is a part of this problem, both in terms of being a hindrance, but as well as being a solution to it, and to try and help inform our residents that no one community in and of itself can't alone fix the problem, but if we don't work together, then we're just not going to fix the problem. In some way, I'll just be direct to try to help fight NIMBYism that is existing in our community particularly.
Yeah, I heard a phrase a week or two ago that said, turning neighbors into yabers. And I think we also, yes, I'll just answer that bluntly. But it is challenging. We have, I think the last Vermonter survey I saw 40% of our population is opposed to any new growth. And so this is a real conundrum, right? If you got, and it comes out in our public meetings and things. I think the legislature took some strong action in S100. One of the things, kind of the by right provision there, where kind of limited DRB's abilities to negotiate down the number of housing units. But yeah, so this past year was a lot of focus on the municipal zoning side. And as I said, this year I think it's going to be around Act 250 and designations. and that's state policy levers. And then you're right, but it's got to work hand in hand with municipal work. And the work that we've been doing has been mostly supporting municipalities. And you see a couple of this projects even in Essex Junction with zoning updates, and trying to help support what, which is a community conversation, right, about what you want for your community that we've been trying to support, both financially and with staff resources. So, but I think I heard your point about we also need a little bit more like, hey, let's all work individually and together on this messaging. I'll try to get some of that into the Building Homes Together press conference. So thank you for that.
I think something that goes along with that I'm struggling with is the contraction in public transportation right now that we're seeing in GMT. They're placing that on the ability to hire drivers, which I understand. But just as the state is putting pressure on this particular area to add capacity, and Williston has exploded and we're about to build quite a bit, we have the busiest routes and some of the worst service in terms of how it aligns with our employers and how it gets up to the town, a major hub for employment, and out to Williston. And that route is, I think, hourly.
Yep.
And getting GMT and getting the state to basically, so the legislative breakfast end of it, for instance, really hammering home to the state that something needs to be done to provide the public transit necessary to handle the requested and anticipated development that they're asking these communities to incorporate. Because right now, asking GMT to even accommodate the 12-hour schedule at the hospital with an additional 20-minute stop is not happening.
Yep.
So folks that get off that shift at night wait sometimes 40 minutes to, just the little things like that. And that sort of goes to the corridor I mentioned earlier, the changes we made to that corridor with all the predicted apartments that are going to be coming online in the next 5 years in that route and that section. And the reduction in parking that we've incorporated really kind of speaks to having good multi-use paths and bike lanes. So
And transit service.
getting a little bit of frustrating seeing the disconnect on the state level between we need to do this, but we're not going to throw any more money at GMT right now.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking about fair support. I'm just talking about basic support, so they can operate at the level that they need to. And it's not just happening here. It's happening in Barrie, right? It's happening.
Yeah, it's all the whole full GMT service area.
So anyway, that's not necessarily a complete CCRPC problem, but from a regional point of view, it affects everybody, right? So maybe
Yep.
it is.
Yeah, all these things are connected, right? I mean, we didn't talk about climate change, sorry, but the state has set out a climate change priority. They set out a housing priority, which are good, right? But they're all connected, and where we develop, the transit service is not going to be successful without more riders in these places. So, please don't stop on the housing side, even though, and I do think, and certainly, and just the transit financing model is not great in Vermont, and particularly for our urban area, right? So the state this past year said, okay, well, I think it was $500,000 to continue fare-free service in the rest of the state. It would have been $2 million to do it in Virginia County or for the GMT service area, and we're willing to bite that bullet, right? And so I'm not sure it's really quite fair. We're not going to meet our climate goals or transportation goals or housing goals or all those without an effective transit service. So it is all interrelated. We're not actually in charge necessarily of any of that, but we try to help fold how things work together. And so we did some a report, I guess, a year or two ago on the transit financing. The legislature asked for a little follow-up on that. Will be another conversation in Montpelier this spring. So please, there'll be probably an opportunity to weigh in.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Nothing more for me.
Nothing, anybody? No? Amber? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks
Have a good
for all
night.
you guys do.
Thank you, Charlie.
Take care.
All right. 5C, Essex Rescue Presentation, and I believe, yes, Colleen is here on Zoom.
Hello, everyone. I'm Colleen Ballard. I'm the Executive Director at Essex Rescue, and I have accompanying me tonight Peter Matullo, who is our president of our board, and can speak to any questions you may have about any strategic planning, futuristic stuff, anything like that. So in going back and forth with Regina and sharing some of the new things that are going on with us and updates and changes that we're making operationally, we came to the conclusion that it'd be great to check in with the village and see what questions you have and just bring you up to date with some new things that are going on with us. Obviously, the last couple of years have been tough, and we were in front of the village board here for increases and discussing the financial challenges we were having and the workforce challenges we're having. We're slowly working through those things. We are definitely coming out on the better side of things, which is a breath of fresh air compared to where we've been. Still challenges in our future. There is a Vermont regionalization study that's taking place currently that I've sent the information to Regina. And actually anybody is welcome to participate in a survey speaking about Vermont EMS, and it's for all stakeholders to discuss the challenges that you've had, that you're seeing, whether it be financial or response times or really anything. There are a few questions that the legislature has specifically asked the study to address, which is the main focus. But any feedback you have, there'll be a open meeting to all stakeholders October 30th at 9 a.m. at the Williston Fire Station. I also shared a survey link that people can access and provide feedback if you desire, a more private setting. But I encourage as many people to get involved as possible. This certainly affects everybody, not just funding financially, but as people who call and need the ambulance. It's definitely a service that everybody finds important. And, you know, it's definitely at risk right now. So I believe as part of your packet of information, you were provided kind of like a summary of kind of a year in review. Do you have that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. And then I don't know if she also included the Q3 data that we've been sending to all the municipalities as well.
I don't think that's in the packet.
That's not part of it. Okay.
We have it.
Okay. So I can just run through these pretty briefly. So our call volume is up as expected, and it's even more scary that it's gone up at 250 calls in just this last quarter. So our call volume is on the rise. At this point, we're on track to hit 3,200 calls in January from 3,044. That's a pretty big jump. The crews are averaging 8 to 10 calls a day. We are still experiencing the staffing shortages. However, I will say we have, I don't know what happened, but we've turned a corner, and I have applications for employment coming out my ears. It's a great problem to have right now. We have made a few workforce changes allowing those that are volunteers who meet certain qualifications, making them a front seater in the ambulance, which adds a significant value to their position and their time spent training to obtain that position. We are now compensating them for that position. It has saved us quite a few people that we've invested a lot of time and training into, that were going to leave us either to go work at other places that would pay them for that skill set, or people who were working other jobs to make ends meet. This allowed them to continue on the ambulance, and let one of those other extra jobs go, which I feel is a huge win for us, being able to retain people that are okay doing this type of work, because it doesn't work for everybody. That's a significant value for us. So we are hoping, fingers crossed, that in the next month or two, we will be bringing on a second ambulance 5 days a week, 12 hours a day. So we'll have a truck from 5:45 to 5:45 a.m. to 5:45 p.m. And then from 8 to 8, Monday through Friday, we will have a swing truck. So that puts us in a great place. I'm very pleased that we are working our way that direction. We have been in discussion with St. Michael's Rescue, Williston Fire, and Richmond Rescue about the mutual aid boundaries. St. Michael's continues to get a significant amount of our call volume, and it's taxing their students significantly. Their enrollment is down. They don't have as many student volunteers as they once had. So, they've got to keep the ones they have, and they're burning them out on our call volume. So, being able to take more of our calls by having another ambulance is great, but also maybe reshuffling some of the boundaries. Now that Williston is online with an ambulance, which wasn't the case years ago when the matrix was made, that may also help support breaking up some of that call volume. So Williston coming up Park Street, for example, is closer than St. Mike's coming from the interstate side of things. So Williston would actually be a better choice for some of the locations in the Junction than St. Michael's. So just small changes like that, to best, get ambulances there sooner, and also make sure that we're not tapping out those resources as well. There is a couple tables on here. One is our fiscal year ending expenditures, revenue, and capital reserve. Very pleased and very grateful for the funding that all of our municipalities, took the jump with us, because we were able to put funds into our capital reserve, which we haven't been able to do the last few years. For people that don't know, our capital reserve is what funds the replacement of our ambulances and critical pieces of equipment, like our cardiac monitors, all of which continue to rise in cost. We are rechassing one of our ambulances rather than buying a brand new one, and that saved us $150,000. The price of the ambulances have gone up another $100,000, and a 3-year wait time. So everything's continuing to go up. I'm sure we all know that. Any questions on what I've discussed so far?
I don't.
No.
I
Okay.
do.
Marcus does.
I do.
Yes.
So as you looking at the call volume, I mean,
Yes.
and noticing, and you're right, you've got that increase this year, but it looks like it's really the biggest impact is really coming from canceled mutual aid.
Yep. Well, canceled mutual aid.
Yeah. So sorry, so I guess I want to understand a little bit more about that and the
Sure.
impact on Essex Rescue. Again,
Are you speaking
understanding-
about non-transports?
No, so I see transports, non-transports, and then the canceled mutual aid. But when I look at those numbers, relatively speaking, even if you look at it in comparison to 2020, it's relatively similar until you get to canceled mutual aid, and then it blows up. You saw a huge increase last year from 2020, but it's still very high. And so, again, thinking about your model of having ambulances ready to go, and again, maybe I need to understand this better, but you're not paying on a per call, you're not paying your staff on a per call basis, you're paying them to cover those hours. So therefore, I'm trying to understand the impact of these calls against your expenses, or how these impact your expenses, because you're paying for them hour to hour, not on a per call basis. Am I not asking this right? Maybe
You stumped her.
so
Yeah, I'm trying to,
I'm trying to
cancel?
understand. Yeah, because for the most part, and again, understanding the fact that you get reimbursements primarily from transports. But when I see the increases of canceled mutual aid, how is that impacting your bottom line? How is that costing you more money?
So one of the differences here, and this is just a matter of understanding, I guess our definitions. So a non-transport means that there was actually a patient contact for us. Whereas a canceled mutual aid, that doesn't just mean that that was a mutual aid call. That includes calls that we responded to, but let's say it was a medical alarm. So there was actually no patient contact.
Okay.
So that does include calls that we too responded to, but those didn't necessarily have patients.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Okay, so then thinking about, again, this year and the fact that you have revenue in excess of your expenses, which allows you to put money into your capital reserve, which is fantastic. You were not able to, you say for the past few years, can I get more clarity about like how many years are we talking about, and what if you had been able to all along, what would you have put into the capital reserve, or what would you need in the capital reserve on an annual basis in order to maintain a level that would allow you to purchase the necessary equipment?
So I have been in this position for 2 years, so I can speak to the 2 years that I've been in this position. The biggest challenge we're facing is our payroll. Our payroll has been in excess, needing to hire more people to fill the positions that the volunteers were no longer there to fill. So that was a significant expense. When COVID hit, it took an even bigger hit on us. And that was $200,000, $300,000 the last 2 years that we weren't able to put away. What that meant is I have since had to extend the life of our ambulances, which is costing us significant amounts of money in repairs. So between having to pay more people to cover the ambulance, which wasn't an issue before, to extending the life of ambulances that should have been replaced at 6 or 7 years, not 10 and 11 years. I think that's probably the most significant issue. I think what you're getting to is there's all these calls that we're actually not responding to. So why are our expenses going up?
Yes.
Is that basically the sum of your question?
That's where we're heading. Yes.
Yep. So in order for me to put another ambulance on the road, that's going to cost me to pay people to do so. In order to keep that going, I'm going to have to put money into that, which means those calls right now that are sitting there as mutual aid or canceled, those calls are now going to be moving over to the non-transport or transport section. Those should be calls that Essex Rescue is responding to, a majority of them, not St. Michael's, not Williston, not Richmond. There is always going to be overflow, but the goal is to really decrease those numbers and be accountable to those calls.
All right, thank you. That helps clarify that. So last question, and I'll let you move on. Is again,
Sure.
What would be the average? What's the average impact on a patient if you respond to my house because I need it. And what is the average cost of transport? I'm thinking about, and I know later on you're going to get into the subscription and pieces
Yep.
of that nature, but I'm kind
Sure.
of curious about the average cost of a transport.
Well, there's a lot of things that come into play with cost. There's a lot of variables, but I will say it could be upwards of $3,000 for a paramedic level, a really, really sick person going by ambulance. It could be as much as $300 as a basic transport, low mileage, just sitting with you, monitoring you on the way to the hospital. No invasive procedures, checking your vital signs, talking to you. That's pretty much what you're looking at.
All right,
Can I just clarify? Were you asking about cost to the patient or cost of Essex Rescue to support the call?
I was thinking
Those
about
are-
the patient, but it's an interesting distinction because as I said, I'm thinking about two factors that I know you're going to talk about here in a second with the 30,000 of unpaid non-transport, as well as the subscription that you're going to talk about in a second. I'm curious, again, those numbers help me understand your upcoming requests concerning the increase, as well as, again, how you're looking at these things and finding ways to offset. So anyway, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
I think, thanks, Pete, for bringing up. I realize that there's new people joining these groups, and not everybody was here for the presentation last year. So the ambulance transports, and if I'm saying anything that you're already aware of, please tell me so I don't bore anybody else with this, but there's a cost for readiness and there's a cost for the service being provided to the individual. And one of them is partially funded, and then the other one is coming from mainly our municipalities. So the cost to have the ambulance there, staffed, ready to go, and equipment all ready, everything within date, all of those things, that funding doesn't come from anywhere other than our subscriptions and from our municipalities that we serve. As far as the service being provided, that is, I don't even know if I'd call it partially covered by insurance revenue for the services being provided to the individual. So are you familiar with insurance billing for medical insurance?
I hate to say it, but yes.
Okay.
And I have been well serviced by Essex Rescue personally, so I'm well familiar with how my insurance dealt with that.
Okay. The allowable really leaves us with a pretty significant a loss, basically, that we have to try and make up for without compromising our ability to continue providing reliable care. And as we continue to have to pay people and bring more ambulances online, that's something that we're trying to prepare for ahead of time versus this, like what happened the last couple of years, which I really had no control over before taking this position, which was not preparing for it and then having this large ask. I'm hoping that something comes out of this regional study that I'm on the committee for, because this doesn't just affect us here. This is a huge issue everywhere in the U.S. Vermont's system is very outdated and was, it worked well for its intentions at the beginning when people weren't billed for the service and people were all volunteer supporting the ambulance. That was all great, but we have surpassed that and we haven't made any adjustments to keep up with that. Any other questions on that? No? Okay.
Good.
Let's see here. Capital campaign, new building project. Pete, you want to talk on that real quick? Oh, did we lose him? Peter?
May have.
We might have. He was just there 1 second ago.
That was very convenient.
And now to you, Peter. Oh,
His one talking point and he disappears.
maybe he's on a call.
That was,
there he
that
is.
was just absolutely perfect timing.
No, that was horrible timing.
Yeah.
Peter, would you like to tell people about the capital campaign and building project?
Sure.
Thanks.
So for a number of years now, Essex Rescue has realized that the current headquarters, which we have over at One Educational Drive right by the high school, has not been meeting our needs for a number of different reasons, and I'm happy to continue this conversation with anyone who would like some more details about that. But so we embarked on a capital campaign to raise funds for a new building, and we did not have the foresight to recognize COVID coming down the path and ran headlong into that. So our capital campaign program has paused, and we are in the midst of figuring out our next steps to reinvigorate it and figure out the next headquarters for Essex Rescue. We have made a couple of steps forward, and one of which is the purchase of property over off of Essex Way from the Langs at the Lang Farm over there, which is a developable piece of property. And that is one that we're speculating on building for. And then there are also some other areas where we potentially have partnership opportunities to look at joint ventures for a potential building. All options are on the table right now, and we are continuing to explore how we're going to get our capital campaign relaunched and raise those funds and take the steps forward for the next building.
Great.
Any other questions for Peter?
I don't have any right now,
Okay.
but thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else?
All right. So our annual subscription will be going out soon. We're not making any changes to the subscription plan as far as price goes, but for those of you that are unaware of what this is, Essex Rescue offers an annual subscription to households. It's not the person. Some subscriptions are paid for by the person or they have a cap. We don't do that. It's $50 per household for the year, calendar year, January 1st to December 31st. You don't have to be related. You don't have to have health insurance. If you were to be transported, or I shouldn't even say transported, if you were to receive services from Essex Rescue will bill your insurance, and then whatever deductible or remaining amount that is unpaid, we write off. And last year we brought in, I think it was $126,000 through the subscription plan, and that was, I've got to find my papers here, but that was only 2,400 subscriptions, just for a sense of how many that is. Essex Rescue serves a population of almost 32,000. So there's a fairly good number of people that aren't subscribed to this that we are working on now that the Reporter's reprinting and the Mountain Gazette is printing, and we have more avenues to get this information out. We are going to push harder to make sure that it's out there for people to take advantage of. The biggest change this year, which I think is part of that discussion, is Essex Rescue will now be holding patients accountable for non-transport bills. So the state changed our protocols requiring that anytime an ambulance is called, we will now be required to perform a full assessment on somebody before we can leave the scene. We can no longer arrive. If somebody initially had a complaint upon their phone call to 911 and we arrive at the doorstep, we have to obtain a non-transport form, which is a form that basically ensures that the patient is being exited from the healthcare system appropriately and legally. So we perform an assessment, we complete paperwork, we make sure that they are fully aware of the risks of not going to the hospital. They sign off. Occasionally, we must connect with a physician in the ER due to the complaints of the person and the risks of the refusal. But we, sign the paperwork with them and we leave. That time that we've spent on scene with that individual can go anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. It can involve a simple lift assist. It can involve dealing with somebody having a mental health crisis, and it takes a long time to work with them to figure out solutions or find them the right destination or help resources. So it's changed from when we get there and they say, oh, I don't need you anymore. I was having chest pain, but it's gone. Those days are no longer upon us. So due to that change, and also some of the uses that were being called for these days that are not true emergencies, we are going to start holding patients accountable. Essex Rescue has billed for these services for a couple of years now. The difference is if the amount of the bill was $250 or less, Essex Rescue wrote it off. We didn't ever send anybody to collections. Because of the amount of money that we are in fact writing off, not just because people are just not paying their bills, but also through these non-transports, is a pretty significant loss. And in the end, it comes back to taxpayers. So we have all sorts of things in place to assist people with the costs of this. A non-transport for us just coming and assessing you is $150. There are insurances that cover it, but there's also insurances that don't. So if you subscribe $50 for the year, there's no cap on this, you're covered. If you don't do this and you end up receiving a bill and it is a financial hardship, we have payment plans, we have hardship forms that people can submit, that we look at financials to family size, and we'll work with people on this. But the days of having people not pay their $2,000 bills and everyone else is responsible for it just can't be the answer anymore. So it is a significant change. It's not one that I like. Quite frankly, I don't think any of us like having to, under circumstances of an emergency, hold anybody to this type of thing. But today in healthcare, you don't expect to receive any sort of healthcare and not have to pay something for it. I think our $50 plan is better than any plan that I've ever seen come out of my health insurance or health services. But if anybody is curious, for the city of Essex Junction, the third quarter here, Essex Rescue responded to 354 calls. And 43 of those required paramedic intervention. So from January 1st to today, we've responded to 854 calls in the Junction. Just some, fun data for you. Does anybody else have any other questions for me?
Andrew? No? Marcus?
No, I will say that I did just the other day when I was reading this, and based on a number from one of the other discussions, we have about 2,500 households in the city of Essex Junction, which would, if everyone participated, would raise about $125,000 for Essex Rescue. Just food for thought.
Amber, I can't see you, but do you have any questions for Colleen?
Oh, I don't. She already answered them. Thanks.
Okay, great. Colleen, I appreciate you joining us. I don't have any further questions. I appreciate getting your annual ask early, what we would consider early. So thank you very much for that. I think the increase is
You're welcome.
modest. And I think not going to speak for everybody. I understand where it's coming from. I guess I will say that I hope you have success on the statewide committee that you're on, or regional committee, excuse me, being heard, and that you include us in any conversations, you know, that include any kind of systemic change to how this all works. You know, we're counting on your service as a community, so we would appreciate being involved in as we can in conversations and staying involved. You know, we appreciate the contact, so thank you.
Absolutely.
Regina, did you have anything that you wanted to bring up around this?
I don't.
Okay. You know, I haven't to date tonight, but I'm going to reach out because I see a hand up in the gallery. So, Colleen, if you could stick around for a couple more minutes, somebody wants to ask us a question. Annie, you have your hand up.
I do. Thanks. Hi, Colleen. Thanks for all you do and you've done personally for my, you know, as Essex Rescue has done for my family. Is there, Colleen, and I maybe you said this, I was walking the dog while listening on my phone, I'm sorry. Is there a button or an opportunity for a person to purchase the year for another family? And secondarily to that, because I think a lot of people would do that. I like Marcus's math that he just did. And then secondarily, is there a space where people could apply for that? And I don't know that maybe that's too much work for you all. I don't know how that would be determined. But I think that collectively, the number, I'm not sure if Marcus is talking about home ownership or actual residence. I'm not sure how to define that, but I think there's a way to discuss this publicly that can bring about some support for people who do have that extra. I'm sorry, what was the year amount again? 126?
Are you talking about the subscription?
Yeah, the subscription for a family. Is it just 50?
50.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that would throw down that 50, and I think there's a way to cover more people, but I don't want to put work on you guys. So if there is something like that, or if there's not something like that, I'm happy to help create it. If I don't know if a volunteer could do that in your, you know, I think that's probably a little tricky, but I really think that people would step up, and then you would find yourselves in a healthier position to be able to accommodate. Especially, you might be able to build a fund that is supportive of the problems you just discussed, because personally, you know, my mind's going to universal health care while you're saying we can't expect, right? So I understand that you can't expect, I 100% am with you, but I wonder if there's a way to create a scenario whereby people are like, oh yes, I would absolutely, but I know that complicates things, and I know you are all overworked, so I don't mean to put work on your plate. I just wanted to throw the concept out there, and I really appreciate your time, and thank you for all your work and energy.
So this is the second time that I've heard somebody raise the question of being able to gift that to someone else. I think that is a incredible gift, and perhaps we could come up with some sort of a voucher. The hard part with the subscription is that it's an agreement between Essex Rescue and the individual receiving the service. So we have to be careful that we're not putting somebody into agreement that they haven't themselves agreed to, but perhaps there's a voucher or something that we could create that you could gift to somebody, and all they have to do is submit the paper or submit something online. That seems like that could be a very doable thing. Maybe.
Great. So
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna ask the two of you to connect outside of this meeting to work out the details.
So I'll be honest with you for a second. I think we should let us have this one more interaction, because anybody watching this, it's healthy for, in my
Annie,
opinion.
I'm gonna move us on. I really encourage you and appreciate the conversation where it's gone. Ask the two of you to connect
Really interesting.
offline. So thank you both very much. Colleen, thank you, and Peter, I really appreciate it. We're gonna move the meeting on here, and let us know in that instance if there's anything we can do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see anybody else with their hand up. And there's nobody in the room, so we are going to move on to business item 5D and act as the Cannabis Control Board Commission for, do you want to introduce this?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Sorry, let me just share my screen.
Can I ask a quick question on procedure? Because if I recall, for like liquor control, don't you exit one meeting, enter another? Do you have to do the same for this?
Doesn't appear so.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, we've only done it once, but it doesn't, I don't remember doing that.
yeah, the liquor licenses, they tend to be on the consent agenda, and it's just clear that you're acting on as that body.
Okay.
Okay, so I think folks are fairly well familiar with this, this application. Essentially, you have 60 days to make the decision. There is some discrepancy even on the 60 days. They have new cannabis rules that talk about the local Cannabis Control Commission making a decision within 45 days. The email that told us about this application and the active rules, as best as one can tell from the website, are pretty clear that they're still on the 60-day rule. So given that, it means that you have until October 25th to make a decision on this application. Essentially what you have in the packet is the information from the DRB's decision. So just very quick summary from staff and myself and zoning administrators take on H270 is that the ability of the municipality to use your zoning regulation to dictate where outdoor cannabis can happen is not permissible in my take of it, based on what the changes they made in H270. The DRB, that non-action decision of the zoning administrator was appealed to the Development Review Board. The Development Review Board essentially aligned with that and think that the outdoor cannabis cultivation use can stay. The last step on the city's aspect from that perspective is this license to be issued by the Cannabis Control Commission. So my recommendation is that this license can be issued, should be issued. But I know there is a lot of questions around this legislation and how it works and the DRB decision itself. So I think we can take those questions and just know that you've got 2 more weeks to actually make the decision on the 25th.
Okay.
I am also noticing, just so everybody is aware, that I don't see Jason here, and I'm looking at our handy dandy spreadsheet that we've been using to make sure people are properly invited, and he's not on that list, which is my fault. So it is possible that Jason doesn't know that we're having this conversation tonight, and continuing to the 25th would probably be better due to that oversight. If you had questions that you wanted to ask of him, because just want you to know that he's not, it's possible he's not here because he wasn't told that we were doing this.
Well, then if for no other reason, I think we should continue on the 25th.
Yeah.
I do know that we have several questions, and we're going to take the opportunity later to speak with our attorney, I think, on this topic. But overall, if he's not here, I think we'll do that. Did any council members have any questions related to this? We can talk about it now a bit and continue it.
I do have one specific question, and it relates to Rule 2 on the cannabis rules, and under 2.4.5. And this is based on the fact of what I heard in testimony from neighbors during the DRB and its proximity to the high school. I have a question about whether or not an inspection is either been done or can we do an inspection. According to 2.4.5, it looks like we can do an inspection to verify the security of the property. So I would like to see that done if possible. So based on that, and based on Jason not being present, I think I would agree that we should move this to the 25th for approval or disapproval.
Yeah, so I can look into that. My reading of that rule in the, it's Rule 2 of the cannabis regulations is it refers to the board doing a physical site visit. I don't know that that automatically means that you folks as a local commission can do that, but I will certainly look into it.
Great. I think all my questions are going to be the result of our conversation later. And since we're continuing, I'll ask them next week. But I'm going to pull Zoom up to make sure he hasn't joined. And Amber, did you have anything you wanted to add here? No. Okay. All right. I'll ask the basics. Are we comfortable? We have it in front of us, so I'm assuming we're comfortable. We have all the documentation we need. We've received everything we want. We're allowed to get from the state. Okay, great. So without any action on this, well, if we're going to table it, we probably need a motion to table it. Or do we just hold
Yeah.
from a
I think you're-
procedural point of view?
Yeah, you're just not making a decision. We'll have it on the agenda again for the 25th.
Okay.
Can I take an opportunity here to speak on this?
Do we do that for
Just
these
a
meetings?
suggestion, actually.
We do public to be heard for,
Is this a deliberative session right now?
no.
Cam?
Okay. Sure. Come on up, please.
Thank you.
And if you, sir, it's James Lee.
James Grimsley.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for allowing me the time here. It's been a great experience actually listening to you guys do this work, and I really am grateful for it. As we create the dialogue around cannabis in our communities, I think it's important to realize that there are two really important veins of this. One is certainly THC and its effects as a drug and protectionism around that and how it should be handled, but also as a building material. And the sativa hemp plant is a 15-foot plant that may be mistaken for this. So as we start to build the language around it, I think it's important to know that there's a Y in the road here. The stalks and the skin of the plant are extremely valuable, and we'll learn in short order how valuable that is with ethical answers for things that we're seeing and I'm seeing in building. But as we move forward, just that why and understanding that how we approach it and address it is, important. So it's a language building suggestion, but thank you for allowing me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us. All right, let's see. Is there anyone else? There's no one else in the room. Is there anyone else online that wants to add to this conversation, such as it was? Let's give it a second. Not seeing any. Okay. So I think from here, we have 5E discussion and consideration of state cannabis legislation recommendation.
So, sorry, just give me a second.
Yep.
Getting there on the packet. Got a bookmark for half a second. Okay. So, prior to this last legislative session, it seemed, I'll say, relatively clear. The cannabis legislation is quite unclear from the starting place, but it seemed quite clear that what the city did in land development code regulations was in accordance with the municipal guidance on what you can do, which is you can use your zoning to define where the establishments can go, without a clear prohibition of any of those establishments throughout the city. The changes that they just made in H270, which is Act 65 of 2023, really, in my read of it, eliminates the ability for local municipalities to use that zoning tool or your ordinances to regulate outdoor cannabis cultivation specifically. So this seems like it will have a different impact in a rural environment than it will in a much more densely populated environment where the smell from these plants do permeate and expand beyond property lines. And I think what have heard for some folks is it's become a real nuisance and limiting their ability to enjoy their backyards. So the recommendation here is to make some recommendations to the legislature to see if there can be some, I don't know, correction is the right word, or because it sounds like from speaking with some folks that they didn't intend to have the legislation go quite this far, but it seems pretty clear that the legislation has gone this far to bring some semblance of understanding of how this will impact an urban environment versus rural environment. The legislature has talked about setting up different rules based on urban and rural environments under a number of different categories. I would say Act 250 being probably the biggest one in terms of can we define as a state where we want development to go, and maybe we don't need Act 250 there, versus where the state could really benefit from having those environmental protections. So defining this is a pretty difficult concept, but they did in H100 just in the last legislative session as well, made some of those housing rules for local municipalities based on this concept of where we have service of water and sewer versus not. Right. Thinking about it in that way, some municipalities will have sections of their municipality that's served by water and sewer, and other sections of the municipality that are not served by water and sewer. So this rule wouldn't be just sort of a blanket municipality wide. It really would be, we're talking about tightening to those boundaries. So my suggestion here is that we make that recommendation to our reps and senators, and yeah.
Yeah, I see the word reasonable in regulations. So yeah, that will, I think we want to perhaps put some time into what we think that is. We've heard from some lawmakers that they were, in crafting this, considering issues like they had in Charlotte, I believe, where a very large landowner felt that they were being zoned out, but there was actually quite a bit. So they're thinking about a more rural area and communities basically that didn't want cannabis in their area, coming up with creative ways to say that they couldn't have it. And when presented with a situation like we see ourselves in, we're a little stumped and admitted that that wasn't really part of the consideration, as Regina mentioned. Having watched some testimony from the last session, it does seem intentional that they dismissed concerns of odor at the boundary of a property, that they were not concerned, and in fact wanted to make sure that communities couldn't regulate odor. Otherwise, they admitted by doing, and out in committee, that the purpose of that seemed to be, well, if we don't prevent them from considering odor as a nuisance anymore, then there'll be no more cannabis cultivation. So in that, we have the legislature saying this creates a nuisance. It creates a nuisance that's over and above any other nuisance that we know in the state, It's not farming that's incidental. It's not manufacturing that's covered under other rules. This is persistent for many weeks or months. And so they purposely carved that out. So I think one of the requests has to be, restoring in those areas a community's ability to mitigate the impact on the residents. And then, and I think when you look at a community like ours, I think the other ask has to be, and I will stop talking in a minute, the other ask has to be the removal of that requirement that a community must host it. Because even though we identified correctly a zone in our zoning for this to occur, that was simply by something that we had already designated as agriculture. There's really no difference in that area in terms of how many people live per square mile or square half mile or acre than anywhere else in our community. So they will have to remove or reconsider the idea that a community that is defined either by sewer or water has the ability to take that out, to say no. Because if it were a perfect world or indoor, for instance, which we've seen work without an incident, without issue, and it weren't impacting other people, then I would feel much differently about it. But unfortunately, this isn't farming vegetables. And this isn't just a problem we've seen here. This has happened in other states where they've done it. So I think those are a few of the things that we need to be very specific about. And I do think that the idea, and we can talk about this later, but I do think that the idea that, well, I'll stop there. I think those two are pretty important. I don't see how a community like ours finds a place where it's appropriate. And I'll change the word appropriate, where it doesn't have a negative impact on a neighbor. And I don't know that we want to favor one activity, industry, business over the quality of life of the people around them. I don't know how you make that moral distinction between who is allowed to negatively impact someone else. So anyway, that's kind of my initial input on this. And I do actually think there's going to be support in the legislature for this in some way, in some areas. When presented. Anybody else?
I'm happy to make the motion and even suggest that if you want, Raj, you work with Regina on the letter.
I mean, are there other things that we,
Can I add something to the discussion before
absolutely.
before we get there?
That's the, yeah.
So I want to make the distinction too, because as you mentioned, I think there's two very distinct things going on here. There is the ability for us to zone within our municipality, and then there is the ability to enforce nuisance laws. I understand the reason for eliminating the ability to use nuisance odor while having lived in rural communities before and having been in many other states and communities that do allow this as well. I know the odor can be an impact, but at the same time, if you are farming this on a large scale or a larger scale, I can understand wanting and needing to legislatively protect their ability to have those particular businesses. That aside, I do recognize it has impact in a community like ours that is so densely populated. I think if we could get the ability to zone our municipality, the nuisance doesn't become really a problem for us as a community. I mean, I could be wrong, but at least then we would have the local control to be able to say, look, we're okay with it here, not here. Because I can imagine, let's just say the current agriculture area decided it wanted to become a field of cannabis. There's a number of closely dense neighborhoods right there that would be impacted by that odor. But I can understand also, look, we've allowed it, so therefore, I don't think you can have both. I think we have to kind of prioritize, and I think for this particular product, for what I believe was the intention of the CCB originally, I think it's okay that we not have the ability to regulate based on odor, but I disagree with our inability to regulate on a zoning basis.
I don't see I hear what you're saying. I just don't see the point in regulating on zoning if you're just going to drive someone who's already been there out of their home. And I think we're going to hear from someone in a few minutes with their hand up who feels like they're being driven from their home. So I hear you. I think we should, I think it's going to be an interesting debate next session and how they play it.
Yeah.
My worry about not asking for one without the other is they've demonstrated a willingness to carve out in very, very unusual and confusing ways, to the point where even the lawmakers that reported these bills out of committee don't understand what they say. So there's disagreement among that core of lawmakers that produced the legislation as to what it actually means. And so for that reason alone, I think they're going to address it, some of it. But I worry that if there's not the ability to see, for me, it's sort of like the legislature said, they made a few years ago or some point over the last few years, I don't have the facts in front of me, they basically changed what an HOA could prevent, if I'm understanding this right. They made a law they passed a law that's basically said, if I understand it, an HOA can't prohibit an ADU. But it didn't impact current HOAs.
Right.
And the way I see this is they're pushing through this right now and impacting zoning that preexisted, homeowners and properties that preexisted, life experiences and quality of life in communities that preexisted. And I don't, to my core, understand how you can do that on one end and not have the same consideration globally with everything. And so for me, it's a bigger question of, it even goes down to what you're telling, what the state can tell us we have. I mean, we're being told right now, that whole exercise we just did, this silly little CCB thing, there's, according to what our official understanding from our attorney and our management is on what our actual role is, that is a completely useless exercise, right? We have no ability to, we're being told that we have to go, if we want to participate, we just basically have to rubber stamp it. And I can tell you that this has taken dozens and dozens and dozens of staff hours, and we get no fee for the application, right? So I think
We
this,
get $100.
oh, bless them.
It comes from the state.
Okay.
It doesn't
I'm sorry, I
come
was
from us.
wrong. Not from the applicant, from the state. So the state's up, okay. Maybe they get it from there and they're just passing it through. I don't know how it works, but so I think it's even, it's even bigger than the crop. I mean, this could be anything. This could be an Amazon data center with all the noise and that it produces, and I would have the same reaction and say that doesn't belong in a neighborhood. It really is not about the cannabis. Unfortunately, that product produces side effects that are environmental for a period of time. Otherwise, outside of that time, there's no notice, right? I think the CCB has adequately, come up with rules that make it relatively harmless for them. Like, nobody knows. It's fine.
I understand, but let me use your data center example, for instance. Again, even in the current example of what we're talking about on Taft, right? If we were allowed to enforce our zoning, this problem would be solved. In the data center example, our zoning, if allowed to enforce our zoning, would be solved. You don't need the nuisance. The nuisance is an add-on. The nuisance.
Yeah, and I guess, I understand what you're saying.
So
My
that's why-
only concern, like I said before,
Yeah.
my only concern is that we're specific. Otherwise, as they've demonstrated, they may consider, I'll call them shenanigans, to carve it out. Yes, you can have your zoning, no problem, but you can't regulate odor at the boundary. And I, that governance subcommittee testimony hearing is on YouTube. That is literally part of the discussion. We can do this, but we're not going to let anybody do. And that they're trying to stand up an industry and they're trying to deal with it in communities that are doing, and that was part of the conversation, ordinance gymnastics to keep them out because they just didn't want it. And I think that needs to be addressed. And I think they missed on it a bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, and to the point where they've done this huge blanket thing, and it's impacting communities in ways that they intend, right? So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, again, looking at all that legislation, they specifically almost right at the beginning say, in our role as a local commission, right, we're to enforce the rules based on zoning. But then later on, their adaptation in H270 takes that all away. That's what we've kind of, I think, summarily come to.
yep.
That being said, again, you know, and I get your point. I think we can have that conversation. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have that conversation. I'm simply saying if we got, at the end of the day, the ability to enforce our zoning, these kinds of problems are then solved. We have that control. That being said, one of the things I did want to ask concerning this, and I think it's a very creative solution, talking about water and sewer, but in my own research, I just want to verify, is talking about an area served by water and sewer the legal language, or is it speaking to R1s, R2s versus other types of zones? Because if we're making this ask, are we asking them to allow that zoning regulation in R1s, R2s, or is this truly the legal language needed that it's in areas served by water?
So from the state level, there's no standardization of how people refer to residential zoning districts. And we have a lot of areas that are a mix of residential plus other types of mixed uses. So if we try to define it by zoning district, I think that would just be very hard.
But I think your central point of restoring a community's ability to decide. So there are many communities in the state, if I'm not wrong, that don't zone at all. Right? There's no planning in that respect. They could have water and sewer, but in their center village areas potentially. I don't know of any off the top of my head. Maybe there's nobody, but there are many that don't. But restoring a community's ability to make the decisions for themselves on, it's going to be a tricky balance for them, like defining how to do it and what that boundary between. I mean, I think the water sewer is the most recently used and probably the best place to start. It's probably going to leave some places out. But, you know, is there any part of this, Regina, do you think, or any other counselors think that, you know, they tried to get around some of this by, again, I think legislative gymnastics around it's farming, it's not farming, it's agriculture, it's not agriculture. And those designations, I mean, do we want to jump into that area? Or are we just going to see how this whole other part of this plays out?
I mean, I think from my perspective at this stage of the game, we should just try to be as succinct and clear about what it is our issue is and what do we think is the best way to solve that. They have mired up the farming and the cannabis in such a way I wouldn't even begin to know how to suggest they step away from that or undo that, to the point where I could see myself recommending something in a letter and it could have a whole slew of consequences that I may have not intended.
I guess I meant more, and I wasn't clear, sorry. I was absolutely not clear. I guess I meant more along the lines of, and it's a really separate conversation potentially, of the state's ability in those same areas to designate a farm operation. Because if the state is going to say, that's fine, you can do all this, I can see next May having a bill come out that fixes all this, except for farms. And the Agency of Ag still having the ability to turn around and say, that's a farm, even though it's in areas that we,
I mean,
or I can see that muddying up the conversation. I mean, I can think of, and only in respect to like livestock. We're not talking lettuce. I mean, I'm talking, the current issue up in the village right now is centered around livestock, in ducks. So is there an ask there to say that's similar? I mean, it's a similar theme. This is an activity that you've said is okay in an environment that really doesn't. It'd be very difficult, and I'm not even convinced that the property in question meets the qualifications for buffers and everything else. It's too small. I think that there's a parallel ask there to say those requirements or that ability for the state to grant a farm operation for, maybe it's just livestock only, because if it's a different operation than having a vegetable farm.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, to me, both of these battles seem like uphill battles.
Mhm.
That one seems like a complete vertical rise, and very hard for me to imagine that there would be any movement on it.
And
I could be
according,
wrong about that.
yeah.
But
I mean, I don't think any of us is anti-farm, but I think we heard testimony at the last DRB meeting that there are unintended consequences of mixing the two, and we've already, established a process and a comfortable level of having chickens in the city, and that hasn't. So anyway, that's all I've got to add to this tonight. Unless anybody has any other specifics, we can work on in the background potentially. But Amber, did you have anything you wanted to add? No. Regina, do you feel like you've got what we want, what you need?
I do think I have what I need.
Okay. Do you have anything you want to add? Don't have to. No. Okay. All right. We'll just start with Zoom right now. Stephen Padnos' hand has been up for quite a while. So Stephen, did you have some comments you wanted to make on this topic?
Hey, I did. Thank you. I think you've touched on quite a lot that I had planned to ask about. I think that it's, you've got 2 or 3 different topics here. One is asking for clarification on current rules. And that's kind of where this, what the agenda item was listing. Please tell us what you actually mean. And as has been brought up, the same section of the statute says that municipalities may regulate and also says they may not. So that's something that would certainly confuse me. So I guess if you're looking at a request, which by the way in its current form, I'm all for, and with a bunch of additions as well. But even as as little as what's currently there, just asking for clarification, that's great. Asking about rule changes, I don't know. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing for a city council to do. I would certainly do it as a concerned citizen, but it's something that that I thought of when this topic came up. Sorry, turn on video there. So I definitely have some suggestions for additional asks if you are open to asking for changes. And I think that I think this might get to Marcus's point as well, actually as well as yours, Raj, that as an example, there's currently a state level prohibition against retail sales near a school, and outdoor cultivators are required to have their crops be hidden from the road. But there's a significant odor, as I think we've all discovered, and when that odor is in a place where children walk to school, I didn't know what it was, but on a walk, we met a mother and daughter, and the teenage daughter knew what the smell was. So if you're trying to keep this stuff away from kids, then there perhaps should be a prohibition against outdoor cultivation within the same buffer zone around a school. Similarly, to get to, if you can't make rules for nuisances such as smell at the boundaries, then there can still be a rule like the chicken rule, right? For chicken hens. Well, some people want more. A lot of people don't want any on their own yards, but it's a reasonable compromise. So, you had mentioned setbacks, asking that there be a setback from property boundaries would be reasonable, and something, 50 to 100 feet, 50 feet doesn't prevent the smell, 100 feet might help with really small operations, but that type of thing would also, or that type of ask, or a rule of that sort would at least give, there's a definition of reasonable, right? Rather than any individual just saying, hey, I don't like it, and therefore it should go away.
That's what you're doing.
Excuse me?
Heidi, could you mute your microphone? I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was on.
No problem.
Oops.
No problem at all.
My bad.
And actually that's a perfect example of why, if there's something written in the law, then that's something that people can all agree to follow, even if they might work to change it. Right. But at least it's something that we all have, and we can all say, look, we disagree, but here's the definition of how we have to deal with it. So I think there were some other things that are confusing to me, partly because I'm not a lawyer. When reading, scanning, or perusing the statutes, as my temperament can allow, one of these was there are again contradictions between prohibition of an establishment, and the wording has me just wondering whether they mean a specific establishment versus a type of establishment. And I recall 20, 30 years ago when somebody wanted to open a strip club in South Burlington, this went on for years, that there were rules, I think ordinances discussed and maybe passed, and lawsuits all over the place. And so preventing that kind of thing makes perfect sense. But zoning, especially pre-existing zoning, and I think that's another point you brought up, is if we have a situation already and they want to make a change, the state decides that there should be a change, there's got to be some consideration for the status quo. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, yes, when you brought up farming as well, which again is, I agree with Regina, that's more of a cliff than a hill to climb. But the whole DRB thing that went on, that's been a very difficult thing, I think, for everyone involved. And you know, a similar level of clarification, I would be all for asking for that. You know, as to if the intent is really to get rid of, or is to usurp essentially all local zoning when a farm determination is granted, then they should just spell it out. And if it's not, then they can spell that out too. You know, it's pretty, it seems easy to a non-expert that a rule could be written, or an additional paragraph could be written that says that local zoning still applies or local zoning doesn't apply. And it certainly would have saved us a lot of time, effort, and money if that had been in the rules in either direction. So just, you know, I think, I guess, sorry, to sum up, yeah, clarification would be great. I think it's a bigger issue to ask for any significant changes, and, you know, the law of unintended consequences. Things may not work out the way that you hope. Thank you.
Thank you. That did bring up another little, you know, a couple places in the new Act 65, it talks about this now enjoys the presumption that it does not produce a nuisance. I can't remember the exact language, but there's the presumption in there that which then puts the onus for dealing with it on the landowner that has an issue, as opposed to the city or the municipality to then mitigate. And I think I just think that's wrong. I think if a landowner that's feeling that something is being done wrong shouldn't have to have the financial wherewithal to hire attorneys and go through that process, and that's discriminatory at its base. I think if that's why the city, the municipality, the entity of government is there, is to take that on, and if they take that away and give it this protection, I just think that's sort of what's been done here in a way. And just go on my soapbox, that this country has a big history of doing that kind of thing to areas of communities that don't have the power to speak back. But anyway, one more speaker, Annie Cooper.
Hi, thanks. Is it true that the state of Vermont ruled that anybody is allowed to backyard grow? And is it true that, for example, Rise, your neighbor, if they wanted to grow, they can grow, I think, 4 plants? And if that's true, then what, you know, I feel a little bit confused about the city's approach to this in general. It feels like you're using the word control a lot, and I just feel a little confused. I don't smoke marijuana. I never have. It's not for me, and so I don't have any skin in the game in general. I'm just confused by our approach. So anyway, my questions are: is it true that the state ruled that anybody's allowed to backyard grow? And is it true that if one of your neighbors, Ross, for example, wanted to grow, I think they can grow 4? Thanks.
I didn't quite understand the second part of your question. They could grow. I missed the last couple words.
So I'm asking if sorry, I tried to phrase it so that it made sense. So I think it's 4 plants that someone can backyard grow without asking anyone. It can be outside. It can be, and they can, for personal use, they can just grow it.
I don't know the details of the personal use part of the act, Annie. So I don't know.
Huh. Thanks.
I do know that communities around the country that have legalized cannabis have successfully implemented odor ordinances to handle this, which I think was part of the reason the legislature purposely carved it out, so that didn't happen, to promote. And I think I'm not putting words in their mouth. I think that was part of the conversation and the approach. If that's what you're asking in terms of like what a neighbor can and can't do.
I was not asking anything about odor. I was asking about the legality of if someone can backyard grow marijuana for personal use, and that, do you know that? Which it surprised me that you don't, because you're in a big conversation about it. And then if so, you know, that does it should be in conversations about this so people understand the laws. If we're gonna talk about these things, I think we should talk about all of it.
The part I don't know, Annie, is how many plants and what the process is they have to go to specifically, because we've been dealing with a slightly different issue. People are certainly permitted to grow, but what hoops they have to jump through and paperwork they may or may not have to file, I'm not aware of. The 4 to 6, I believe, I want to say it's 4 and 12 immature plants, but I could be wrong. 4 plants with grown in the typical Essex Junction neighborhood layout with maybe 6 to 8 feet buffer between homes after modification's been made means that someone could have an open window in the season where those plants are maturing and causing a nuisance. And right now, the concern, I think, for the city is that we have residents who are concerned or being impacted and feel that there's nothing anybody can do to help them not have that multi-week or multi-month impact. So I think we're trying to figure out right now, not how we can have, more control than we need. We're trying to figure out how we can, literally do what we're asked to do, which is, keep the community running and mitigate nuisance issues and whatnot. If there was a way to welcome this into the community where it didn't impact anybody, I think every one of us would probably be all for that. But that hasn't turned out to be the case. I don't want to speak for anybody else. I'd probably be all for it. But that hasn't turned out to be the case, unfortunately. So we're trying to figure out what we can ask for so that the state can balance its desire to have this industry grow without negatively impacting, in our case, a densely populated community. Okay, so that's kind of what we're at right now.
But again, we're not talking about personal use. We're not
talking about
that at all. We're talking.
I'm just saying that the conversation, when being had, should have all the supporting features and facts about those things. That's all.
Okay, thank you. What were you gonna say? Sorry.
No, I would simply say, Annie, I understand what you're saying, but I would say that we are talking about it. The personal use does not apply here because we're not talking about any impact to that. We're not talking about any changes to that. We're only talking about outdoor cultivations. We're talking about larger operations in a densely populated area.
Mark, I appreciate that, Marcus. It is outdoor that I'm talking about. And what I'm suggesting is that if we're going to talk about the topic in general, even in one way, the knowledge when someone asks a question should be had at the table by all of you.
Thank you. All right, so it looks like you have, Regina, you have what we need on that. And I'm sure it'll come up again at some point. I don't see anybody else online with their hand up.
more?
Sure.
Again, my name is James, and thank you for having me in this conversation. I think there's a third prong here that we're missing, and that's composting. And I'm going to tell you the story directly. In May, someone used the term outhouse through the anonymous system at the state level, and the town manager triggered Faith Foley, a health compliant officer, to come to my house. And her words, "You're all set." Why? She didn't discover a hole in the ground. She didn't discover a 1932, quite honestly, trigger word in our legal system of outhouse. What she discovered was simple 3-bin composting that any one of us can do with sawdust and wood chips and leaves and hay and straw, the way our ancestors have done for thousands of years. I know this. I live right here in the city. So I'm here to say it plainly. When we talk to the state about what we're talking about, cannabis cultivation, there are 2 arms of this. There is one that we're talking about, but there's a building arm of this that we have not talked about that will become a conversation, a very important one, I believe. Smell, Do we have a problem with our farmers and smell in the state? Have we learned how to handle that animal's excrement properly? Some farms have. We can bioreact everything. That's where we're going. I'm sorry, but from a young age, I was carrying studs on home projects, and my father, he could build a 2-story colonial in 2 weeks with plywood and drywall. And this is causing immense damage to us. Disease rates do not lie since 1970. So I don't want to go too far off track here, but as we suggest to the state what we think is the next best thing, I can tell you as a citizen here, I rented a room to a soil scientist, and she is a beautiful being, and she changed me forever. And the mycelium will show us what we need to do. And when we partner with the earth and partner with the ground around us, we will find our answers. So I hope that this body can send this message, and that our governing body will begin to offer us not just the law of composting to protect us that says anybody can do this, just like growing cannabis in your backyard, anyone can do this, but give us guidelines on how composting can and will replace, and has already in my house. I have completely functioning water and lake water injection systems in my house, but I primarily use the earth right where I am, and we all can, and it's not hard, and we don't need to be afraid. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. All right. So if there's nothing else on that agenda item, we have 2 executive sessions.
There
this
is a
evening.
motion.
I move that the city council authorize city manager to write a letter with this request to the legislature and authorize the council president to sign this letter on behalf of the council.
There's a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Great. Ayes have it. Thank you for the reminder.
Got it.
You're not leaving. We have 2 executive sessions, so before we do those motions, we can do consent. So I have a motion to accept the consent agenda.
So moved.
Seconded.
Perfect. Without further discussion, all those in favor to accept the consent agenda, say aye.
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 It's unanimous. Reading file? Council comments? Anybody? No? Regina?
So just one comment, our strategic planning project is up and running. I am gonna put the link to the website in the chat for folks. So there is a survey right now, that's out. It would be awesome for absolutely everybody. People who work here, people who live here, to fill this out. And we will also, that will kind of roll into a first event, which is called the Think Tank. That will be November 2nd and November 4th, a Thursday night and a Saturday morning. And this really is kind of focused on the high level vision. And then we're going to eventually move into very much more specific action items through a variety of other different processes throughout the next couple of months. The concept, the idea is that we will have final product in February. So very excited that this is finally up and running. I think it's going to be super, super helpful for all of us to get some direction on what we want to focus on, and can help with budgeting, can help with work plans for departments, can help with work plans for committees. And so really looking forward to getting input from everybody in the community, and please help spread the word.
Can I double down on that? And again, everybody fill out the survey. The think tank you have to enroll. So please go to the website and enroll and participate. This is the beginning of our process. We need as much participation as possible.
Amen. Great. So there are two motions. One of them I have up in front of me, the other one I have on paper. So since I'm seeing this one in front of me, I'll make it, somebody else can second. I move the city council make the specific finding that premature disclosure of the contractual matters would place the city at a substantial disadvantage. And I move the city council enter an executive session to discuss a contract pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1A to include the city council, city manager, water quality superintendent, and Apollo Raju Badareddy, excuse me. Second. Right. Without further discussion, all those in favor to both motions say aye.
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 Unanimously passed. And want to read that one? There's two.
Motion 1.
Was it?
Yeah, no, you were right. I'm sorry.
Okay. The way I'm going, I'm just, I should ask first.
I move that the city council make the specific finding that general public knowledge of pending or probable civil litigation or prosecution to which the public body is or may be a party would place the city at a substantial disadvantage. I move that the city council enter into executive session to discuss pending or probable civil litigation or prosecution to which the public body is or may be a party pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1E to include the city council, city manager, and city attorney Claudine Safar and Christine Shamus.
Second.
Great. Without further discussion, all those in favor of those two motions, please say aye.
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 Passed unanimously. We don't have any action on these tonight, so we will not be coming back. We'll be adjourning from the executive session and going into the other room, I suppose, right? Okay. So you are all set, Channel 17 and